Hello people, it's been a long while, and for those of you that remember me, thank you, and for those of you that remember me, you're probably wondering where the hell I've been. Well, to be blunt, mental illness sucks along with the depression that comes with it, so finding the motivation to play games, talk about games, and make videos on games was just really hard to come by. And to continue from that, I was just busy with other things in my life, so finding the time to even make videos just wasn't there. Another thing is that my PC setup was becoming even more anemic. For those of you that are more familiar with PC hardware, I was still running on a GTX 970, so I was definitely out of date. So even if there were games I wanted to play, I could barely run them or record them, so with all these things added up, making videos was just really difficult. But I have good news. I have some more time on my hands with the help of medication and therapy. My depression for the most part has fucked off for the time being, and to continue from that, I also got a new PC setup so I can actually play and record footage. Although, funny thing about that is with the games I played recently, I didn't think to record all of them because I didn't think I would make a video for each of them, but here we are. So I'm gonna use some of my own footage as well as footage from other sources, so my apologies for that. But I've played through 5 games over the holidays, and I thought, hey, let me just do a short review for each of them and give you my general opinion on all of them. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So I had a pretty fun time with Spider-Man, although there are some things that I found a little repetitive or things that kind of reminded me of Ubisoft's sort of checklist formula, but they're usually out of the way of the main game and it wasn't as painful to deal with. So I still very much enjoyed my time, and the main thing I enjoyed about this game was the web swinging. There might be a small minority that prefers older Spider-Man games, but the speed and momentum that you can reach in this game is just so satisfying with the way you can dive bomb, swing high up over buildings, wall running, zipping around, doing this weird launch jump. It's all so fun. This is one of the few open world games that I don't want to fast travel in because traveling is just that good. And I consider it one of the aspects that makes this game so great. Are there things that I wasn't a big fan of? Well, I'd say that the combat is something I have mixed feelings on. It kind of reminds me of the Batman Arkham series, except with a bit more skill expression and variety, but something about it just got really old for me. I mean, it starts off strong and it's cool to see the way Spider-Man handles himself in a fight, but then after a while, it just got really tiring. Maybe I wasn't experimenting enough with the different gadgets and moves, but I found it was just more efficient to just air launch enemies and stay away from the ground, and this just got a little exhausting. Doing finishers was a little buggy for me as well. Pressing the buttons the same way, sometimes I would do the finisher, and then other times I would just keep dodging for no reason. So I'm not sure if that's a bug with my controller or the game itself, but it was pretty frustrating. But something I do like about the combat is, depending on the missions you're doing, you actually get little challenges. Maybe you have to reach a certain combo, maybe you have to do certain moves a certain amount of times or use certain gadgets, and I like stuff like that. It just adds something more to do. So I don't think the combat is bad by any means, it just didn't pull me in that much. As for the main story and missions, I think it was good overall. I like this game's interpretation of classic Spider-Man characters and their relationships together, especially between Peter Parker and Dr. Otto Octavius. And while shit is already going wrong in the city, Octavius is left unchecked obsessing over his work and his sanity is dwindling more and more, transforming him into Doc Ock and the leader of this game's version of the Sinister Six. Overall, it's a cool Spider-Man story. The only thing I didn't like about the story was having to do these stealth sections and these Mary Jane sections. I simply was not a fan of these things. To be fair, the stealth sections aren't the most difficult. You can actually get through them rather easily because the AI is actually brain dead and you can rush through the levels really fast. But you see, that's the problem. If I'm just rushing through something, it's because I'm not enjoying my time doing them in the first place. And honestly, I think I spent more time looking for the key to this fucking room than any boss fight in this game. So yeah, aside from these moments, I enjoyed most of the missions and seeing the story unfold. I'd say most of my issues are small, and I think Spider-Man's a solid game in the end. So for those of you that are not familiar with Remedy, they're actually the original developers of the Max Payne series. So they actually have a lot of experience when it comes to shooters or just action games in general. But instead of doing bullet time in this game, you have telekinetic powers where you can throw shit at enemies, throw the enemies themselves, you can make a shield out of debris, you can mind control, you can levitate. It's just really cool. And outside of these powers, the shooting feels really nice too. The sound of the weaponry, the feeling of impact when you hit a target. And the weapon variety is decent too. You have one main weapon, but it can function differently depending on what you choose. You can have a pistol, a shotgun, a submachine gun, you can have this charged piercing round, and this sort of mini rocket launcher. And this is all in a fully destructible environment. You combine all these elements and you have a solid action game. And that's the thing, nothing really comes in the way of each other. It's actually very easy to control. No pun intended. Another thing I like is that the game isn't too easy or too hard either. It's actually a good balance of challenge. You have to keep moving and be aware of your surroundings because enemies can actually kill you rather easily. I'd say the only minor issue I noticed is that enemies can become a little spongy later on, but overall it can be ignored and I had a lot of fun with the combat. Now, the exploration is a little interesting. It kind of reminds me of a Metroidvania with the way it's structured and layered, except I don't recall opening any shortcuts that made me go, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Instead, I just felt myself getting a little lost. The locations are distinct from one another, but I find all the hallways and stairwells just kind of blend together in my head, so I can never really tell where the fuck I was going or if I was even going in the right direction sometimes. And I'm typically used to being lost because I grew up playing Metroidvanias, but I found it was more noticeable here. But even with that being the case, I actually appreciated the game not holding my hand. I actually had to look at my environment and look at the signs pointing me in the right direction. So I guess my feelings are a little mixed on the exploration. As for the story, I had no fucking clue what was going on. As far as I know, there's this thing called Polaris that's been guiding you. There's this thing called the Hiss that's taken over this bureau and you have to stop it. You've also become the chairman of this bureau, but you have an ulterior motive where you're trying to find your long-lost brother. I have no clue. The writing was just kind of cryptic and weird, so it didn't pull me in that much. Yet, I still liked the atmosphere. It had this weird sort of Cold War Secret Service vibe that I really liked. So while I didn't know what the fuck was going on, I appreciated the game following its own vision and not being painfully fucking generic. So if you can ignore certain aspects about the story or exploration, I think we have a solid action game here that you might enjoy. Albeit a bit short, I was able to finish the main game in about 8 or 9 hours, but there was a lot of side content and DLC that I hadn't finished yet, so I'm not sure how long the game is with those included, but even then I'm somebody that enjoys short and sweet experiences, so I don't mind it as much. A fun game overall. Alright, so I have a bit of an interesting history with the Yakuza games because the ones that people enjoyed the most are the ones that I actually found the most issues with, but the ones that people didn't like as much were the ones I didn't have as many issues with. Either way, I still enjoy most of the games because RPG titles have a certain quality to them that I can't find in other franchises out there. It's like the games let you play through a Japanese soap opera or drama with so many twists and turns and conspiracies. And while the subject matter can be serious, the game doesn't take itself so seriously and can be the goofiest thing at times. Yakuza Like a Dragon is no different, and honestly, I think it has one of the best stories in any of the Yakuza games I've played. And it primarily has to do with the characters. Ichiban is a fantastic protagonist. He was born in a soap land and grew up in it. He turned to delinquency at a young age. He turned into a bottom-rung Yakuza. He went to fucking prison. From prison, he gets out, gets shot, and then gets left in a homeless settlement where he has to figure out what to make of his life. He's the epitome of being at rock bottom, but trying to make the most of it and climb your way back up. The heart behind this character is just contagious, and not only for you as the player, but even the other characters within the game. Ichiban's relationships with these characters are really powerful, and that's the key thing. Relationships play a big part in this game's story. Another aspect about the story I liked is the concept of gray area. Are people on the other side of the law actually morally bankrupt, or are they just people trying to get by in a life that wasn't so kind to them? And are the people that are functioning within the law absolutely pure? And when you combine all of these aspects, it leads to one of the most powerful scenes in any Yakuza game I've played. Just fantastic. But for the love of God, please play with the Japanese dub. Anyways, as for the gameplay, sorry to say, it just didn't click with me. And it has nothing to do with the game being bad, it's just I'm not a fan of turn-based combat in general. But what I will say is that at the very least, I was able to tolerate it. There's a decent amount of interactivity behind doing the moves and guarding, which is nice, and speaking of the moves, they're actually pretty crazy at times and can be pretty fun to watch. It's just after a while, it became pretty exhausting to me, especially during these dungeon sequences, and I was honestly debating just watching a playthrough of the game to see the rest of the story instead of playing it through, but I stuck it out because I was already pretty far anyways. So while Like a Dragon may not be my favorite in terms of gameplay, I'd say it's probably one of my favorites in terms of story. I definitely recommend checking it out. So Red Dead 2 is probably one of the most detailed open world games I played, and when I say detailed, I mean it. Whether it be the side missions, the random encounters, the main story, the characters, or even people eating a fucking meal, this game is incredibly detailed, and probably holds one of the greatest stories that Rockstar has ever told. Playing in the shoes of Arthur Morgan and your so-called family of outlaws that are not only on the run from authorities but an ever-evolving civilization is very gripping. When things seem to be going right again, things go very, very wrong, and the way the game depicts that stress is well done. You see it in the decline of sanity in your leader, Dutch Vanderlyn, as well as Arthur's fading illusions of him and the lifestyle that he's lived. And depending on how you've played the game or just how you view things, this game gives a lot of meaning to the word redemption. Just a very compelling story. What do I think of the gameplay though? I have some things I like and some things I don't like. For one, I'm not a fan of the way this game controls, and this is just a case with modern Rockstar games in general, because the more detailed they become, the harder and more clunky they are to control because of these detailed animations that need to play. You do adjust to it though, so it's not the worst. I like the shooting a lot though. The weapons feel great, they sound great, and it mainly has to do with the euphoria physics. Another thing I like about the shooting is this added interactivity where you actually have to cock the weapon back, and it makes semi-automatic weapons more meaningful. I will say though that the game does become a big shooting gallery at some point, but it's in a part of the story that's already very compelling, so I don't mind it that much. There's this one mission where you're attacking an oil factory, and it probably has one of the coolest set pieces ever where you're riding down a hill and the music's blaring. Oh, just so fucking cool. Something that began to bother me a bit though is the game's mission structure, because they're spread so far on the map and you have to ride to each of the mission locations in order to start them, but then as you start them, you're trailing another person, so you're just riding again. At the very least in these moments, there's dialogue to listen to, so it's still a little interesting, and your moments riding to the mission can be cool as well because you might have a random encounter or side mission that you'll come across. So it's not the biggest deal breaker for me, it could just be a little exhausting at times. So while I have my gripes here and there, I think Red Dead 2 is a fantastic game that anyone should experience. Probably one of the most detailed open worlds, with great side missions, random encounters, shooting mechanics, and a fantastic storyline to boot. Definitely recommend it. Okay, so while all the other games I've played were great in their own right, Lost Judgment is actually the one I had the most fun with. And while there's a lot of people that enjoy this game, it has a bit of a mixed reception when it comes to things like the storyline. Some people believe that the first Judgment had the better story, and personally, I don't think the first game's story was better or worse, I just think the tone was different. I mean, the first game had you solving serial killings which got you in trouble with the Yakuza, as well as opening a whole conspiracy to do with pharmaceuticals and the health ministry. So shit was pretty heavy and serious, and the game overall was more gritty. Lost Judgment, on the other hand, while there's a big conspiracy and murder involved, the game mainly has to do with high school bullying and suicide, which is a very serious and important topic, but that's the thing, it's just different from the last game, but I think Lost Judgment takes a bit more of an idealistic approach to the story. So it can come off as more cheesy, but that's the thing, I think that's a quality you see in a lot of RGG games anyhow, so it didn't really bother me that much. I still very much enjoyed the story because the conspiracy itself is still interesting, it can still get rather serious, and the game makes you ask what justice really is. And I'd say that's the main concept that Yagami is trying to fight as the protagonist. So while the story could be a little corny or downright fucking ridiculous at times, I still think it's enjoyable, and how many games can you beat the shit out of high school bullies? And speaking of beating the shit out of bullies or just people in general, this game's combat is probably the best it's been in any of the RGG games. It takes the physics of the Dragon engines and the combo and style juggling from games like Kiwami or Zero, except the moves have more of a kung fu spin and feel more explosive, and on top of that, it feels really smooth and polished. In fact, previous RGG games feel sluggish in comparison. As fun as it is beating the shit out of enemies though, I will say that this game is the easiest I've played out of all the RGG titles. Your window for dodging, parries, as well as these things called immortal reversals are really fucking high. And on top of that, your damage output is insane. With this being said though, I don't think it's a bad thing, it's just really subjective, but I think the game gives you more freedom to experiment with all the different styles and moves because the game is structured this way. Overall, combat is just really fun. I'd say the main game has been improved as well. There's not as many tailing missions and they're not as shitty to play. There are still some chase sequences, but it's not too often. I did deal with an issue where tackling your target was bugged, but I'm not sure if that's just a PC thing. But I will say that this game replaced some of the moments with these stealth segments that are not great or horrible, it's just they're are not the most fleshed out, it feels very basic, but I find these aspects can be easily ignored for me. And just like any other RGG game, this game is packed with a lot of side content. I'd say the most fleshed out side content in this game is the school stories. From here you'll be joining a bunch of school clubs and groups doing a bunch of different mini games to uncover a big mystery surrounding the school. I will say that some of the mini games feel more fun in comparison to others, but you can still come across some pretty interesting moments within these stories. So overall, I really like Lost Judgment. Honestly, when it comes to RGG titles, you can come across a lot of things that you can dislike or think are pretty flawed, but like I said, there's just a certain quality to these games that I can't help but love. I do hope this specific series gets another sequel, but I'm not sure how that's gonna go. Apparently, getting this game to PC was a real big pain in the ass, and it mainly had to do with the main actor's agency. And who knows, maybe even getting him to work on the game is really difficult as well. So it kind of makes you wonder what the state of this series is gonna be. All I can do is hope that it doesn't die, because I actually enjoyed the Judgment titles, even if I had my issues with them here and there. Anyhow, that's 5 short reviews for 5 different games. Tell me what you thought of the video down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and thank you to the people that stuck around. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.